Duskmourn has dropped a rotation of some of my favorite commander precons that I've seen in a long time. Today we are seizing the opportunity and digging deeper into the full potential of the Death Toll precon with Cynical Opportunist as our commander. Using the precon as a starting point, we will build off what the deck already thrives in to make a more consistent and oppressive graveyard based deck. I will show all the cards I kept in, but more importantly, my recommended upgrades for this truly terrifying value engine. I'll even run through some lines of plays and insane card combinations that almost feel infinite. Let's start by reviewing the commander. Winter is a 2/5 with Death Touch that mills yourself 3 deep upon attacking. But on your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types and then put a permanent from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter. This is an insane effect that essentially is cheating permanents into play, avoiding any and all casting costs. We simply have to meet the requirement of having 4 card types from among them, which will be no problem for us. Now, a key word in that delirium ability is that we get to choose any permanent to the field. This opens the deck up to so many more lines of play and builds since we are not restricted to the common creature reanimator theme. When needed, we can fetch out a planeswalker, artifact, enchantment, or even land to utilize their effect that we may need. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe as we have some Cynical Opportunist gameplay coming to the channel very soon. The first area I want to take a look at, like any other deck, is the ramp package. For a deck like this, where we're avoiding casting costs, ramp doesn't seem like a huge priority for us, so most of these cards lie within the 3 CMC and under range. The artifacts that I let stay in the deck are Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Solemn Simulacrum. These early turn spells help get our commander to the field faster to either attack to begin milling, or let us play multiple support cards a turn. Solemn made the cut because he is both an artifact and creature, counting as 2 card types when exiling cards from our commander's delirium ability. We also have Sakura Trailed Elder, which is a banger for this deck. Not only does it ramp us early on, but in doing so it sacks itself to the graveyard as a card that we can potentially exile with our commander. Similar to Sakura is Rampant Growth and Harrow. They are card types that will go to the bin while also fetching us a land to the field. Harrow is especially great in the deck as it requires us to sack a land when casting it, putting 2 card types in our bin when ramping. So with these cards in mind and wanting to take advantage of filling our graveyard while still ramping, I decided to add Roiling Regrowth. It's a tuned down version of Harrow, doing the same thing but fetching 2 lands to the battlefield tapped instead of untapped. But I also added Elves of the Deep Shadow, Skull Prophet, and Milliken. Both the Prophet and the Milliken double up as small graveyard fill cards, with the Milliken also being an artifact in addition to its creature card type. But with the ramp recommendations done, let's move on to our smallest category, card draw. Card draw is a bittersweet category in this deck because we basically have 2 forms of it. Since we will be cheating permanents into play from our graveyard, it can basically be seen as our second hand. With that in mind, I still decided to leave in Death Reap Ritual. This enchantment will give us some juice to see just a little bit more of our deck, potentially getting us 4 cards of rotation. But my recommended cards do this in a better fashion. Disciple of Bolas will enter and have us sack a creature, but don't worry, it rewards our devotion to the Almighty by giving us some life gain and card draw based on the sack creature's power. But I also urge you to take a look at Baba Lysaga Night Witch. This 3-drop creature also cares about card types. Specifically, she allows us to tap her to sack up to 3 permanents, drawing 3 cards if the sacked permanents are 3 card types. What we lack in draw, we definitely make up for in graveyard fill. The deck is already filled with some absolute heaters. Nyx Weaver, Crawling Sensation, and Cemetery Tampering are passive mill effects that will trigger on our upkeep as long as we keep them around. Each one also has a second passive that only pumps the cards to be even better and more toolboxy. The Weaver can return any card we may not have want milled, the Cemetery can cast a hidden away spell for free, and the Sensation will make us insects when milling lands. Another card I want to focus in on is Ren in 7. I typically would add this in our utility section, but this Planeswalker +1 uptick is too strong. It reveals the top 4 cards of our library, putting all lands to our hand and the rest of the graveyard. But it has some other useful effects, letting us ramp all our lands in hand to the field, or make a big blocker in the form of a Treefolk with Reach. This card dominates in a deck like this from all the versatility it can provide. Next, the Precon has some one-time fill effects with Stitcher Supplier, Old Stinkfingers, and Dead Bridge Champion. The supplier is an easy 1-drop that gets our deck going from the beginning, while the other 2 cards are crazy mid-game effects that can dump huge amounts of cards into our graveyard. I've been experimenting with the stick fingers, and getting to pay for the amount of creatures you want in your graveyard is so beneficial and a win con in the deck, but we'll get to that line of play later on. For now, let's take a look at the cards I suggest you add to this section. Ripples of Undeath is a strong enchantment. On our pre-combat main phase, we get to mill 3 cards, and then if we milled one that we want to hand, we can pay 1 generic mana and 3 life to put it there. Graveyard Fill at its finest, and we have another card like it with Underrealm Lich. This 5-drop creature replaces all our card draw with a card selection effect. If we were to draw a card, instead we look at the top 3 cards, put 1 to our hand, and the rest in our graveyard. It even lets you pay for it to tap it and give itself indestructible. Next, we have some semi-passive mill. Liliana Death's Majesty can mill us 2 cards a turn from her uptick ability while also creating a 2/2 zombie. But it can even be used as recursion with that -3 ability, returning a creature from our graveyard to play. Stinkweed Imp is another card draw replacement effect with Dredge 5. Instead of drawing, if the Stinky Imp is in our graveyard, we can mill 5 cards to put it back to our hand. With Dredge being such a useful effect, we also had to add Life from the Loam. This sorcery returns lands from our graveyard to hand, but also has Dredge 3. Six and Head Shredder are slower versions of Mill, but they have some very useful secondary effects. 6 mills us 3 cards when attacking, and then puts a land we milled from among them to hand. It also lets us cast permanent spells from our graveyard by discarding a land in addition to its casting cost. And then Head Shredder is just one busted card. This artifact basically puts all lands we mill into play tapped, being another one of our combo-ish Wincons for later in the video. To round out our mill, we also have Buried Alive to get 3 specific creatures to the bin, and Incarnation Technique to mill us 5 cards and then return a creature from among them into play, both putting themselves to the bin and adding a card type to our commander. But if we demonstrate by giving a copy of Incarnation Technique to our opponent, we can double up on the effect, essentially milling 10 and getting 2 creatures. And if you really want to break the bank, you'll have to spoil yourself with a Hermit Druid. It's another powerful card that is a milling gamble. For 1 green mana, you can tap the Druid to mill cards until you reveal a basic land. You put that land to hand as your land drop for turn. It's an amazing card, which is why it sits at such a steep price. But with our graveyard overflowing with card types, it's time to start pulling some out. Reanimate and Whip of Arrows are reprints I did not expect the Precon to give us. For 1 mana and some life, we can get any creature in any graveyard to our battlefield. But the Whip will gain us some of that life back, giving our creatures lifelink, while also being able to pull a creature from our graveyard to the field with haste when activating it for 4 mana. For our recommendations, we didn't add too much reanimation since we have built-in Reanimator in the command zone. Animate Dead needs a screen to itself. It is an enchantment that also gets any creature from any graveyard into play under our control. However, what makes this card so good with Winter is we can use this enchantment as our first Delirium target when wanting to bring back a creature to the field. Winter hands out finality counters like no one is watching, so by targeting Animate Dead to bring a creature from our graveyard instead of the creature itself right away, we basically will get another opportunity to reanimate that same creature again since it wasn't given the initial finality counter and exiled away. Altar of Baal is another card I love to see. We have many ways within the deck to make random tokens, so by exiling one of our useless tokens to the altar, we can then pay 3 mana and trade it in for a creature in our graveyard. The deals have never been better, but what is better is making our opponents sack their creatures while we reanimate our own with the Sheoldred Whispering One. She is an oppressive beast and will get all eyes on you the minute she hits the field. And last up on our reanimation is none other than Marin of Clan Nel Toth. This legendary creature rewards us when our creatures die by giving us experience counters and then returning creatures from our graveyard based on how many of those counters we have. She acts as the pseudo commander of the deck, cheating us creatures into play as long as we're experienced enough. But with that, I want to shine some light on the interaction package that the deck needs to stay an oppressive bully to the other decks. We kept in some removal with Culling Ritual and Convert to Slime. One board wipe rewards us with mana from low CMC permanents being destroyed, while the other removal spell creates a giant ooze for us to swing in with. However, Haywire Might, Scavenging Ooze, Noxious Gear Hulk, and Vile Mutilator are also fantastic removal and interaction pieces. They are creatures whose effects we can use multiple times when reanimating to properly deal and respond to any outlandish board states. However, the board wipe count is extremely low, so we added Crooks of Fate and Deadly Tempest as some budget board wipes. The Tempest can even be a niche and random kill spell if we happen to go against any wide builds, while our sack outlets will protect us from the damage. Drag to the Roots and Overwhelming Remorse are decent removal spells that only get better when doing what the deck wants to do, fill our graveyard. Then there's Reclamation Sage because Manglehorn has gotten way too high in price. Let's quickly cover the utility cards that round out the deck in a very necessary way. Arachnogenesis was another reprint that truly shocked me. Fogs are powerful cards, but any fog with a secondary effect, like something as casually making 1/2 blockers or attackers with reach, will always secure a place in my build. Demonic Covenant is an odd card in the sense that it is a little bit of graveyard fill, card draw, and board presence. It lets us draw a card and lose a life whenever we attack one or more demons at a player, potentially drawing us 3 cards a turn. It then says on our end step we make a big 5/5 flying beater, then we must mill 2 cards. If those cards share all card types, then we sack the enchantment. And then we have lands in the deck that are 2 card types. We have our artifact lands of Tree of Tales, Darkmoss Bridge, Vault of Whispers, and Darksea Citadel. But we got more utility, so here are my recommendations. Visceraseer and Altar of Dementia are great sack outlets that are different card types, with the Altar being an alt Wincon we'll explain shortly. Eternal Witness returns any card from our graveyard to hand, while Perennial Behemoth is a 2 card type creature that lets us play our milled lands from our graveyard. Then there's Matzalantil the Great Door. This artifact can let us loot by tapping it, but can also turn into huge mana when we activate its second ability to transform. It will tap to add 1 mana of any 1 color based on the number of permanents in our graveyard, netting us huge mana to basically play out any cards we want. Defense of the Heart is another great enchantment that definitely deserves a spot in the deck. It sacks itself to the bin to tutor any 2 creatures to the field once an opponent has 3 or more creatures. We can then use it for a second time by returning it with our commander. It's another toolboxy card that lets us get whatever creature-based responses we may need. But finally, it's time to unveil the hidden hero and accolade of the deck. Up first, we have a true underappreciated bomb that is a win con for a deck like this, but also just a great protection piece to have. Elixir of Immortality is an artifact that will win over your hearts by the end of this video. It's a 1 CMC artifact that we can pay 2 mana to shuffle it and our graveyard into our library. It's a great protection piece because notice how it shuffles itself to the library rather than sacrificing itself or exiling itself. It's the perfect response to graveyard hate our opponents may have that can also sneak out a win that we will see very soon. But before that, we must dub the accolade of the deck, the card that removes a huge restriction from Winter's Delirium ability. That card is Hex Parasite. It's another 1 mana artifact creature that we can pay 1 Phyrexian black mana and X to allow us to remove the finality counters from permanents placed on by our commander. We no longer have to worry about our cards being exiled away. Hex Parasite will stand guard and be the first line of defense against that inconvenience that is finality. But now it's time to cover our win cons and some lines of play that will propel Winter to be one of your top decks. We'll start easy with Titania Nature's Voice and Demolisher Spawn. Titania makes us mean 5/3 elementals whenever a forest enters our field. She even lets us play forest cards from our graveyard, amassing a huge army of beaters. And what better way to use those beaters than by pumping them up by +4/+4 if we meet the delirium requirement of Demolisher Spawn. This trampling hasty horror will juice up our creatures to make swings truly hurt. But if we want to move away from a combat win, the Precon has Polluted Crystern. This low cost enchantment will make our opponents lose life whenever a creature is put into our graveyard from the library. Its other alternative room even mills us some cards to then return a creature from the graveyard. I must let you know that rooms have an interesting interaction when cheating them into play. If you were to bring a room card from your graveyard onto the battlefield with Winter's ability, since you didn't cast any side of the card, the enchantment will enter with both rooms locked. Still, the effects of the enchantment are still worth running. So powerful that I recommend you add a second version of its effect with Sir Conrad the Grim. This is an insane creature for this deck, draining your opponents when creatures die, are milled into the graveyard, or if a creature card leaves your graveyard. It's a strong card that will close out the game and secure you a win. But just kidding, because we're back to combat-based wins. Add Scoot Swarm and Amzu Swarm's Hunger. Both are token creators, with Amzu creating large menace insects and Scoot scattering around small versions of itself. Scoot is a crucial piece for one of our lines of play, so let's just get right into it. The combo isn't infinite and can definitely whiff, but those are always the best kind of combos to run. You will need Scoot Swarm out, Altar of Dementia, 5 lands, and the Head Shredder. Oh, and it might help if you have another creature to sack to get the ball rolling. Basically, with this battlefield all set up, you can sack your initial creature, let's say a 5/5 demon that you created, to mill ourselves 5 cards with the altar. If we mill a land or even multiple lands, we get to create more Scoot Swarms by bringing them to the field with Head Shredder. We can then sacrifice the created Scoot Swarms to mill ourselves some more, hopefully hitting lands and doubling up on the amount of Scoot Swarms each time. This combo definitely needs a lot of setup, but once you get the ball rolling, like any Scoot Swarm line, it gets out of control quick. You can easily make enough Scoots by milling just a handful of them to amass an army of thousands of bugs that you can then use to either attack or mill out your opponents with the altar. But let's take a second look at our hidden hero, Elixir of Immortality. Any graveyard deck is going to want to run this protection piece, but when the game is at a close finish, we can use this card in a way our opponents won't see coming. This time for the setup, all we'll need out is Sir Conrad the Grim along with creatures in our graveyard. If life totals are low enough and we have the same amount or more creatures in our graveyard in comparison to our opponent's life, we can cast Elixir of Immortality and then activate it to shuffle our graveyard into our deck. Sir Conrad will see all the creatures leave our graveyard and drain our opponents based on how many left, sneaking out a well-deserved win. But we have another line of use with either Sir Conrad or Polluted Crystern. Both say that when a creature is milled, with the Crystern only caring about our graveyard, we get some life drain. So why not pay a huge amount of mana into the X cost of Old Stick Fingers? Again, if life totals are low towards the end of the game and you got mana equal to or more than your opponent's life totals, all you need to do is pay that mana into the X cost of Old Stick Fingers, with Sir Conrad or the Crystern out, draining them for whatever the X amount is, since the Stick Fingers specifically puts that many creatures into your graveyard. This deck is a ton of fun to pilot, and I'm interested to see what cards you add or any themed builds you may run. Be sure to leave those recommendations down below in the comment section. And while you're on your way down there, consider supporting the channel by using our TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing from the site, and subscribe so you can get more EDH content.